Welcome, everyone. We're going to wait just a few minutes to get to start officially because sometimes people just join slightly late. So you're going to have to listen to me for a minute or two, but just welcome a few people that I see: Larry Franson and Bob Swanson, David Wright. I wish I knew where you all were, but here I just got a note to silence my phone, so give me a minute here. Ron Johnson has joined us. Alejandro Ramirez has joined us. And Ron Reese, Robert Baker. Some of you I've talked to before, so nice to have you here. Walton Beatty, Kathy Smith, Jeffrey Gobert, Jay Jones, Alicia Daniels, Phyllis Keenan. Got people joining, so, and I see the numbers are growing pretty quick. Ruby Smith, Jason Craighead. Please, if I pronounce your name wrong, please don't hold it against me. Myra Wolf, Todd Clary, Paul, I can't see that, Jose Avilla. Anyhow, so we're getting a lot of people joining us. So be patient just for a minute and then we'll start. Should we go? Should we do it? Everyone? Good. Well, thanks to everyone for joining us and for your interest and support in what we're doing here at KO Films, and particularly today, the Covenant TV series. My name is Ron Daw, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of KO Films, and also a co-producer of the Covenant Old Testament series. You might be interested to know we had nearly 600 people register for this live stream. And I've reflected upon this today, that I really truly believe we're all here because we're connected in a very unique way through the stories of the Old Testament. Each of us, I'm sure, has a strong desire to keep them from being lost or forgotten or misinterpreted. And I would add to this that I would guess each one of us wants to make a difference in some small way. If you joined us on our previous webinar with Cyrus and Andrew, welcome back. And if you're new, join us for the first time, thank you, and nice to have you with us. Joining me today are Andrew Klavan. A lot of you would know him through the Daily Wire, and or through his books that he's written, and who is also our screenplay writer, who has written the pilot episode for the series on the book of Daniel. Cyrus Nowrasteh, our showrunner and director, as well as John Walton, our biblical scholar. John's an Old Testament scholar at Wheaton College near Chicago, in the Chicago area. And we're just so fortunate to have each of these gentlemen. And I think you'll come to appreciate these incredible people in this webinar as you hear the insights they have and the things they'll share on the project. And before I forget, make sure you stay with us to the end of the webinar, as we'll be giving away a $100 Amazon gift card and 10 signed copies of Andrew's new book coming out in Christmas. Andrew, take a minute. Tell us about your new book. Why did you write it? What's it about?
It's a Christmas mystery, and it's actually it's kind of a short book, like a stocking stuffer book, but it took 25 years to write it. I've always wanted to write a Christmas mystery, and I had a wonderful ending for it, and I just could not figure out a way to get there. And then my friend Otto Penzler, who's probably the greatest mystery editor, I think just the other day, the New York Times called him, the Washington Post called him the greatest mystery editor in the country, which he is. He called me up and said, you know, you really ought to write a Christmas mystery. It's perfect for you. And I thought, well, if Otto wants one, I got to figure out how to tell this story. And so I did, and I'm really happy with it. It got a starred review in Publishers Weekly. For someone with my politics, is very, very difficult to do. And I think it's just a good Christmas gift and a good read over the holidays.
Great. And when's it going to be available?
It is in stores November 2nd.
Great.
So,
what's it called?
It's called When Christmas Comes.
When Christmas Comes. All right. We'll make a note of that, audience. And I'm sure Andrew would love your support. I ordered it on Kindle, so it's coming my way soon.
Yeah, you can
Uh,
pre-order it now.
yeah, I did pre-order it. And John, I know you're always working on a book. What are you currently writing about?
Well, there are two books that are in my current process. One of them is called Best Practices for Faithful Interpretation, where I'm just talking about our methodology as we approach the Bible and try to understand it well, try to be faithful in our reading of it. And then the much larger project that I've been working on for 3 years now or so is a 1,000-page commentary on the book of Daniel, which comes in real handy working with this pilot. So I've been immersed in the book of Daniel for a number of years now, and I've learned a lot in the research process.
Great.
I have to say, John, I've been reading your stuff, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's dense and it's scholarly, but it's an easy read and just very entertaining and illuminating. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thanks, Drew. I try to make it both academic and accessible. So hopefully
Yeah,
I'm doing that.
yeah, you've succeeded, no question.
Cyrus, are you writing anything right now?
Well, the stuff I'm writing is not for publication, it's for production. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. But, you know, I'm especially excited about the Covenant pilot because it'll be the first project that I'm directing from someone else's script, which is Andrew Klavan's script.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with it. I think it's beautifully written, and I'm very excited about bringing it to life.
Yeah. Thanks to everyone. So let me introduce the Covenant Project. As I said before, I think we're all here because we believe the Old Testament stories are foundational to our society and our culture. They're being lost or forgotten or really misinterpreted or misunderstood. And at KO Films, we hope to change that by creating The Covenant, which will be a multi-season TV series that will tell these stories of prophets and patriarchs and saints and sinners and kings and conquerors in a way that honors biblical and historical texts. And we're accomplishing this through the most influential medium really ever to tell these wonderful stories via cinema. And cinema has such a profound effect. I know it has in my life. And so we're looking forward to doing that. And so during this webinar, Andrew and Cyrus and John will share their thoughts on the series and what will make it so powerful. Tonight, we want to talk about the vision for the series and answer questions we received for you, other audience members. And if you have a question you want to talk about, we can put it in the chat. So let me begin. Let me just kind of set a groundwork. I'll address it to all three of you, and maybe Drew, you could answer it first, and then Cyrus and John. But it seems to me that Hollywood has everything they need to produce an incredible series on the Bible. They certainly don't lack attracting the very best talent. They are certainly not lacking in resources. They can certainly do large budget productions and really have the ability to produce something that's truly remarkable, entertaining, and something the audience would actually love to see. So why don't they do it? That's my question. And Andrew, I know you have thoughts about this, and John and Cyrus, you would as well. So maybe I'll just turn it over to you.
Yeah, well, I worked in Hollywood for quite a long time, and I think that people, you cannot overstate how separated from the audience the Hollywood elite have become. This was not always true. That Hollywood has always had some kind of difficulty with religious people and with conservative people, but it has become very intense as their business model has moved away from actually bringing American audiences into the seats. That's not really the way they make their money anymore. They make it by through international means and by all kinds of different releases of the film and streaming and so forth. And so they really don't care if they alienate people, and they do. If you look before the making of The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson, there were virtually no big budget Bible pictures being made. Then when Gibson proved that he could take $25 million out of his pocket and magically turn it into $1 billion simply by appealing to this massive audience. Hollywood tried to imitate him, but whenever they do it on a big scale, the egos and the points of view of Hollywood filmmakers get in the way. So you get films like Noah with Russell Crowe, where they decide that God destroyed the world because we weren't environmental, and we didn't care enough about climate change, instead of because people were sinful. And you get Exodus with Christian Bale, where Christian Bale actually went out and gave interviews about Moses being a terrorist. And then they wonder why people don't show up for these movies. The faithful don't show up for these movies because they realize they're being gamed. They realize that somebody has taken their sacred book, these sacred stories that are inspired by God, and turned them into mouthpieces for Hollywood's particular point of view. And hilariously, when to sort of fight back against this, I worked on a script with my friend Jeremy Boring, who runs the Daily Wire. We handed it in to the agent, and the agent said, "This is the best Bible script I've read in 20 years, but they won't make Bible scripts anymore because Exodus and Noah didn't make any money." And I thought, yeah, well, if you could make it without insulting the people who believe in this, it might actually be quite popular. And that's one of the reasons I jumped at the chance to do this. I mean, I just think that there's an audience out there. These are the greatest stories ever told. It's not a joke. The first, as our president would say, I'm not joking here, like from Genesis to Exodus, you are talking about the greatest work of literature in any canon anywhere. And if you can't bring these stories to the screen, you are actually just missing out on some of the best, what in Hollywood they call IP, intellectual property. You're missing out on some of the best intellectual property because it comes from the best intellect. And so I think that we really have an obligation to do this, and it ought to be a joy. It's only because of Hollywood's peculiar attitudes that it's not.
Perfect. Cyrus, any thoughts, or John?
Well, I mean, I think Drew has really hit on it. But what Hollywood is also missing is that these stories of the Old Testament, they're referenced in our language all the time. And I think that they're foundational kind of to our society, to our culture, to our language. And why don't we try our best to understand the stories of the Old Testament? And just broaden. They don't have to be, as religious as let's say they should be, but they should at least understand the storytelling value and the societal value of these stories and telling them honestly. And then maybe they'll go down that path.
And that's the thing, they really don't get the Bible. To them, it's another grand epic or another incredible myth. It's not scripture to them. And therefore, they really can't capture the heart of a believing audience who has this element of scripture that Hollywood will never understand. They lack the priorities to really motivate them to do the kind of job that would resonate with the believing audience. And I think that's what we may be able to do.
Yeah, great. I think it makes so much of a difference if you come to these stories thinking, why does God want us to have this story? What was God saying in these events? Then if you just come and think like, I can really score with this tale or bring in an audience with this tale. I mean, there's a certain amount of humility and just loyalty to what you're doing. I think makes all the difference in the world.
Great. Thanks to all of you. Again, to all of you, none of you are short of things to do in your life. You all have your own careers and you're involved in many things. You've been successful in so many ways. Why the covenant? Why join part of the covenant team, and what draws you to it versus all the other things you could be doing? And Drew, you kind of alluded to that, but maybe we could just explore that a little bit further.
Well, for me, I mean, I had a very peculiar route to God in the sense that a lot of people come to God through the Bible, but I approached the Bible as a complete non-believer, but as somebody who believed in literature. And I knew that the Bible, as Cyrus says, it underlies all of our literature. There's not a phrase that we speak that doesn't, in some sense, come from the King James Version. All of the stories and beliefs have shaped all of our imaginations, even if we don't believe. And so I just wanted to know the Bible. When I started out, I just wanted to know the Bible as the source of literature because I wanted to be a writer. And through that long process, I became a believer. And so to have the chance to tell those stories again, realizing how they changed my life so much for the better, and how they changed my heart and my soul so much for the better. How could you turn it down? How could you not want to be part of that? I had that experience. I would like anybody who's willing to have that experience.
And I kind of come at it from the exact opposite side. I was raised in the Bible, raised in the church, raised in the teachings of the Bible. And therefore, I've always had this very deep commitment to its vitality and to its significance. And so I think that it's incumbent on us to help people understand it the best we can. The basic message of the Bible is simple. Anybody can read it and understand it. But at the same time, its individual passages can sometimes be pretty complex. And that gives us the opportunity in this kind of medium to open that up and to help people see all that's involved in some of these so that the contemporary audience can experience it anew. And to me, the power in the word can be transformed to the screen. And that's what we really want to do.
Cyrus, what about you? Why do this?
Well, I think that as someone who's come to Christianity fairly late in life, for me, part of it is also personally an education and a process of discovery, and broadening my belief. And so I'm sort of coming at it from that angle. And I think the power of the ideas and the themes and God's word in these stories is the stuff of great drama. These are these, as a filmmaker, those are the kinds of stories that you want to tell.
Yeah, great stories. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but Cyrus, I'm thinking about a comment you made. You were saying to Betsy, your wife, that you weren't sure you were the right person to do this because you were kind of new to Christianity and a believer. And she said, no, that's going to be to your advantage.
Well, let's hope so.
Great answers. So maybe this would be first to you, Cyrus, and then maybe to Drew. Talk about the importance of production quality, set design, casting, crew, musical score, all those things go into making up an incredible production. Do you think the audience really cares about how the quality of it, how good it is or isn't? And will it be obvious, do you think, as our audience watches the Covenant series, that it's different from anything they've seen before?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think that movies and television shows are about immersion. And the more you believe what's going on screen is the way it was or the way it could have been, the more immersed you will get in the characters and in the story. One of the great things I think about Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, I thought it was just the rendering of the ancient world was, I thought, remarkable. I felt like I could walk in that world and believe it completely. And the faces, well, of course, he managed to recreate, I think, a world that we believed and could accept. And that's what we want to do with the Covenant. I think, with production design, art direction, set decoration, props, all of it, the way people look, the way they engage with one another, the way the land looks, the topography, the buildings, the rooms. I think it's incumbent upon us to be as accurate and, shall we say, believable as we can to a contemporary audience that, oh, this is the way people lived at this time. This is the way they acted. This is how they interacted. And I think that's critical to the whole immersive process where we get engaged in a drama and just go with it and become part of it.
Perfect. Any other
I think,
thoughts, Drew?
yeah, well, I mean, it's like the old saying, seeing is believing. I think that, because I've spent most of my life and most of my working time as a novelist, where you have to invent the scene to inside people's imagination. You're working inside their heads. When you write a screenplay, I always used to say it should be easier to write a screenplay, because when you write a scene in a novel and you describe somebody walking across the room, you have to describe the room, you have to describe his thoughts, you have to describe the atmosphere, you have to describe everything. When you write it in a screenplay, you really write he walks across the room, and then you depend on the director and the production designer and the DP and all these people to make that happen in right in front of people. And it can't be in their imaginations. It's got to be right there on the screen in order for them to, as Cyrus says, to immerse themselves in it and to fall into it. And I just think it's very important. I think the thing we have learned over the years about movies is that they are a visual form of storytelling. They are not the same as theater, which depends more on the word. They are a way of seeing the story come to life, and it just has to work.
Yeah, perfect. John, as an advisor to the project and your intimate knowledge of the stories of the Old Testament, I don't know if there's anyone that would know them any better than you, John. But it seems there would be key things you'd be looking for that would be important to you as an Old Testament scholar. Talk about those things. What do you see would be important if you're looking at it from a scholarship or a scholar perspective?
Well, there are really quite a number of things that I'm looking for, that I'm trying to give whatever input I can give. Certainly, we want to tell stories well, but we recognize that as great as these stories are, they're not just stories. They're not just a series of stories. Stories are woven together with a purpose. They have a message. And we're intent on trying to make that purpose and message clear as best we can through the medium. We're also interested not only in the theology, but also in the interpretation. Lots of people come to the Old Testament and they enjoy the stories, but to a large extent, sometimes they're not quite sure what to do with the Old Testament. They don't really have a clear idea of getting what the message is and how they're supposed to work with that, apply it to their lives. Sometimes that confusion can even lead to incorrect or inappropriate understanding of a text. For instance, I'm not of the opinion that the Bible has given us narratives to provide us with moralistic lessons or role models. We could draw some of those from those stories, but that's not what they're for. Daniel and his friends can be commended, certainly. We couldn't go wrong by imitating the strength of their convictions. But we have to remember that this is not Daniel's story, it's God's story. And Daniel's a player in it, an important player at a certain point in history and in the narrative, but it's God's story. So we want to move beyond inspiring stories to conveying what we learn about God as he works out his plans and purposes. And it's those plans and purposes that the covenant is actually dealing with. Then we've got the whole other issue of cultural context. And we've already been discussing that a little bit in the production, to have authentic settings in terms of landscape and etc. But it's more than that. When we read as modern people, we have our cultural lenses that we read through. And that means that sometimes our intuitive readings have been shaped by our own culture, not by the culture of the ancient world. One of the things I like to say, and I say it often, is the Bible is written for us, but it's not written to us. It's not in our language, it's not in our culture. And part of the power of film is that we can bring that ancient culture and that ancient cultural context right into vision so that we can see it. The Old Testament unfolded against the canvas of the ancient world and can be best understood when that ancient world is brought to light. I mean, we talked about this as capturing the lost world of Daniel. There's a lot about Daniel that we don't understand well because we're modern readers. And I see part of my job as making sure that we draw out that ancient culture and ancient setting. And people in the ancient world thought differently than we do. And I hope that I can help us to capture that on the screen, working with the great skills of Drew and Cyrus along the way.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
with that,
point,
go ahead, Drew.
the point that it is a God story is really so important in telling these stories, because a guy, I was just having a talk with a friend of mine who was saying, Jesus didn't go to saints. He didn't go to people because they had like little halos around their heads. He went to very, in some ways, ordinary people, and to people who failed him at major moments. Peter's, that wonderful line where Peter, confronted by Jesus's power and glory, says, go away from me, I'm a sinful man. That shame that I still feel in the presence of God, and I think most of us do if we approach it honestly. That's a human thing. These are human beings, or sometimes ordinary human beings, dealing with an extraordinary God. And that's a very different story than thinking that they're all kind of these perfect saints who are acting, as John says, so to give us some kind of moral example. Sometimes they were quite the opposite.
Mhm.
Great. Good. Maybe to all three of you again, Andrew's done, in my opinion, just an incredible job. I've read the script. Unfortunately, our audience hasn't read the script, and we're trying to kind of hold that back because we don't want to reveal what we're doing too early, but I know you'll all be pleased with it. And he's created a very plausible backstory. He's done an incredible job on character development, used creative license to do it. How will we, that always is a challenge. And it's one of the most common questions that I get asked as I talk to people daily and respond to texts and phone calls is, are you going to be true to the Bible? And I explained to them, well, but we have to be able to use creative stories, creative backstories, character development, things, fill in the gaps. John, what do you think about that? You're probably the one that has, is charged with making sure those filling in the gaps in some ways is consistent with the story.
Absolutely. When we're filling in gaps, as you must do to tell the story on film, as we fill in those gaps, we want to shoot for a sense of authenticity, a sense of plausibility, and working out of what we know from the ancient world. I think one of the things that we can do is that anybody who's read the stories of Daniel already has a backstory in their heads. They've created one based on what they've heard in the past or just as their impressions. And lots of times those backstories that they've created in their minds could use some adjustment. And we can do that. I've just loved the way that film gives the possibility of developing characters. People like Daniel and his friends, they're not static throughout their whole lives. They grew and matured as people. We are also going to be taking account of some recently made available information from texts, from archaeology. There are hundreds of Neo-Babylonian inscriptions that have only been available in the last decade. And we'll try to bring part of that into play as we try to present the backstory. I think that we are going to have to use some good creativity, but guided by authenticity and plausibility so that we can give the most accurate understanding that we can, but present it beautifully and powerfully.
It's kind of a funny question when you say you're going to be true to the Bible. You can't actually write the Bible. The Bible is already written, and God didn't send us a movie; He sent us this book, and so you can't produce the Bible. All you can do is approach the stories with humility and say, like, well, what would somebody be thinking in this situation? How did somebody get to the point where he would do this? How does somebody reach the point where he will walk into a lion's den or into a fiery furnace? How do you get to that place? And you have to do it in a human way. I think that people, John is obviously right that the mind, the consciousness of human beings has changed over time, but people also have common traits with their ancestors that we have all gotten. We can all imagine ourselves. In fact, the more you read of history in general, the more you see that you can imagine yourself into the life of another person. It's the circumstance that is different in some ways, not human nature.
Yeah. Cyrus, what challenge does that present to you as the director in filling in the gaps and creating these stories?
Well,
Anything?
I think that the spirit with which you approach it is really important. You know, as Andrew reflected earlier upon some of the Hollywood productions, I mean, clearly they weren't respectful enough. They just sort of decided to change the themes and to change kind of the point. And we want to stick with the point and the spirit of it, and fill in that narrative in as Dr. Walton said, a plausible way, and stick to the spirit, and be respectful, and put our audience in the position of identifying with these characters and their plights.
Yeah, great. Maybe Cyrus, John, you and I traveled with John to Morocco, saw lots of sets, and what do you feel came out of that? What value did you see that John brought to you as a director that you may not have been able to see or incorporate had John not been there?
Well, first of all, I was very impressed with John's the quickness with which he grasped our process. The production process for some can really be daunting and difficult to comprehend, and it's really a very practical thing. We have a certain amount of time and money and energy with which to accomplish what we have to accomplish. We don't have infinite dollars, infinite locations, infinite places we can go. Within that context, he was immensely helpful, and he understood immediately the challenges. And when we're looking at a lot of the time, we were looking at sets and stages that had been done for previous, so shall we say, historical and ancient productions. And he was very quickly able to sort of latch onto the changes that we would need to make in these sets. The problem, for example, with the pillars, and the problem with the art on the walls, and the depictions of the bedrooms and the furniture and all of it. So he was immensely helpful, actually, in a lot of ways that I hadn't anticipated, because it's not just kind of a scholarly interpretation of the Bible and theology is where he's coming from. He really understands how people lived at the time.
Yeah.
So it was immensely helpful.
Great. Andrew, why did you pick Daniel as the pilot?
Well,
We gave him a lot of latitude, Andrew. We just said you pick the story, and you picked Daniel. Of all the stories, you picked Daniel.
But I have to say, there was a lot of logistical considerations. I mean, a lot of basic, one of the things that Cyrus was just alluding to with movies, if I write a novel, all I need is a pen and paper, and I'm on my way. You know, all you need with a movie is a pen and paper, millions of dollars, and technicians, and all the rest of it that goes into it. So there was a lot of logistical considerations. We needed a pilot that was a complete story, that would move people from and have a beginning, middle, and end, and not be one of the longer epic stories. We needed a story that wouldn't star one of the long-term characters in the Bible, because we couldn't cast that person right away, just needing to raise the money to make the pilot. And I wanted a story personally that was not just exciting and complete, but also inspiring, that didn't, you know, there are plenty of tragic stories in the Bible, and plenty of stories that could leave you with a sort of feeling that this is not, you know, this of tragedy, that it's a tragic world, which it is. But I wanted a story that would also hint at the promise of the Bible, which is that this is a redemptive story, and a story that has where even its faults and its tragedies have a redeeming end that they're moving toward. And so all of those things was kind of juggling all those stories, and I went through the book one by one, thinking, it's not that. But then when I hit Daniel, I realized this is a story that not only speaks the Old Testament language, but it also kind of speaks the New Testament language of redemption. It speaks of faith in the face of death, faith in the face of tyranny, freedom in the face of tyranny. And so it had all those elements of it, of excitement and adventure, and yet could be contained in a single pilot. And so it was really, I just wanted to start off where people could see what all of us have sort of in our conversations have sort of talked about a story that would tell it all in that first, however long it's going to be, hour or so.
Yeah, well, you did a great job. Maybe just one other question, then I'll take some questions that have come in on the chat. The Bible is full of what could be described as difficult content and subject matter. But I personally think the Bible, and particularly the Old Testament in particular, and the God of the Old Testament kind of get a bad rap as to who they really are. I've had a good friend say, well, wow, the Old Testament's full of sex and violence. That's not how I read the Bible at all. To me, it's God's story and his dealings with his children. And so, John, your thoughts on that? Each of you can comment. Do you think we can do this? Can we accomplish this and be faithful to the stories in a tasteful, respectful way that our audience will appreciate?
Absolutely, we can. The Bible presents a real world, and it's not just kind of fluffed up stories of spiritual, pious people. These are people involved in real life and real life's problems. They're people who have flaws. They're people who have moments of greatness. And even the most admirable of the characters have flaws. Part of what the Old Testament wants to convey is that even through flawed people, God can show his sovereignty and his grace. He can carry out his plans and purposes, even through people who are behaving badly. And I think that we can capture that as we try to focus on the way that God has advanced his covenant, his plans and purposes through this wide range of people in the world. So we don't have to focus on lurid details, but we will recognize that people are flawed people. We all are, yet God does his work.
Yeah. Drew, any thoughts?
Well, yeah, if God can't do his work through flawed people, we're in big trouble, because that's about everybody.
The only kind we have.
Yeah.
Must be terribly frustrating to him.
Well, it seems to be his favorite trick of bringing goodness out of the mess we make. And, there's a difference between being respectful and I don't know, elegant and being prissy. There's a funny story when they made that movie about Noah. I thought they just completely gutted the thematic ideas. Even though it was a beautiful movie, they gutted some of the thematic ideas that were actually in the Bible. But that's not what people complained about. They complained about the fact that Noah got drunk in the story, and they were a lot of people were very angry about that. But that's actually in the Bible. Noah does, in fact, get drunk. And so, I think that to show, I think that what we're talking about these real people engaged with a real God. And I think that makes the story, that's what makes the story come to life. If it's going to all be, backlit kind of heavenly world, it's not going to be the story that is actually in the book. I mean, God is God of this world. And I think that we are obligated to tell that. But as you say, that you don't have to be lurid to do that. You just have to be respectful and get the point across.
I watched when we went to Morocco, Cyrus. We spent probably more time on one scene and how we were going to do it than any single thing we talked about. And we're not going to talk about that scene because we don't want to give away the plot and this particular story. But I watched how careful you were and how concerned you were as how are we going to do this and be respectful and tasteful to the story.
No doubt. I mean, we're talking about flawed people, and people become flawed oftentimes by the actions they take.
Yeah.
And those actions are in these stories. But how we depict them and how we dramatize them, there's infinite number of ways that you can do it. We don't want to be lurid. We don't want to be gratuitous, but at the same time, we want to be dramatically impactful and be true to the themes of the stories. and taking all of that in mind. And I think our audience will appreciate that.
Yeah, I do. I agree as well. Let's take a look at a few questions from the audience. One of the questions that I get asked a lot is what faith perspective is this series going to represent? And I would say that if we look at the four of us and other people on the team, that we represent different faith traditions, different faith backgrounds. It is not our goal to represent any single church or any single theology. We want this to have a broad appeal across faiths, across denominations, all of those kinds of things. So that would just be my question there. Sometimes we get asked a lot, why do I have to give my social security number when I invest in the project? And that has to do with what's called the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. We have to be able to do that because in the opportunity that we have to make a profit, if we distribute profits to our investors, we have to have a social security to tie your investment to. So, but it is being held securely. It's like creating a bank account or a stock brokerage account because you're actually buying shares of stock. Let's see, we talked about that. People want to know if we're going to be, what kind of return on investment they're going to get. This is always a question that I handle very carefully, and I always tell people, don't invest something you couldn't afford to lose. Making a movie is not risk-free. And while we believe we have a model that will give a return on investment, we certainly can't do that. Another question, I guess, how can I watch this series? And right now our intent is to stream this through the Covenant app. So you would just download the Covenant app and you would be able to cast it to your TV, or the app would maybe be available on your TV. Another question is, when's it going to start? Well, we're in the process of raising money, and so we don't have a targeted date. We hope to be able to film the pilot during the first quarter of 2022. That's our goal and our desire to do that. It all depends on how well we do there. Let me just see if there's any other questions. That somebody says we're praying for you, and we appreciate that for sure. I think we're getting close to time, so let me just thank you again for joining. Thank you to John, Cyrus, and Andrew. You're sharing your perspectives. This week, it was brought to my attention the story of Esther again. It's a beautiful story. If you haven't read Esther, the story of Esther, and how she became queen and she really saved her people, the Jewish people. It's a marvelous, beautiful story. There comes a scene, and this will be a famous quote, everyone will know about it, but there comes a point where Mordecai, who is her cousin, who adopted her after her parents, she was left as an orphan, and Mordecai is quite discouraged because Haman has convinced the king to issue a decree to kill all of the Jews. And Mordecai is sitting out of the court, and Esther comes to see him, and he knows that Esther can make a difference. And he says to her, in my own words, he says to her, Esther, maybe this is the very reason that you were made a queen for this very moment in time. It's a beautiful quote, for this moment in time. And of course, Esther is instrumental in saving her people. And you read that story and you can see God's hand in her life. And so we think we're at that point in time, and we need your help in order to move this project forward. For this particular moment in time where the culture we're really in a cultural battle, we're at risk of losing these stories. And so we really need your help in making these possible. Without you, it won't happen. We've already discussed Hollywood's not going to do it. And if it's going to be done, it's going to be done by us, by those that are on this webinar. And so we're doing this through crowdfunding. You have an opportunity to invest in it. You will be issued, you're receiving shares of stock in the company. You have a chance, if we're profitable, if we're successful, to get a return on your investment. So I would just encourage you, as we conclude this, that you don't let a day go by before you go to our investment page. Maybe we could have somebody pull that up to show what it looks like. Somebody on our technical team can do that. Maybe. There we go. So it's a crowdfunding campaign. If you go to investinko.tv, investinkofilms.tv, is that right? I should know this. Investinko.tv, and it's fairly simple. It'll walk you through a process. I would just encourage you to do that. So with that, let us announce who is going to get these gifts and prizes. So the book winners: Christy Parker, Chuck Walton, Gwen Conrad, Robert Hammond. That may be the Robert Hammond I know. Lee Milton, Sam Frost. I spoke to Sam this morning. Congratulations, Sam. Welton Beatty, Peggy Boyson, Thelma Jones, and Marion Boyle. So as soon as that book gets out, Andrew's we'll get the information to Andrew, and you'll receive a copy of it. And the gift card is, the $100 gift card is Leah Dungo. So congratulations to all of you. Again, thank you. Thanks to John, Andrew, and Cyrus. It would also help us if you would share our link on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those medias. We're on all of those. That would help us as well. And I think we've got a little bit of a poll. Is that right? Do we have a poll we want to pick up here? Is that the cover of your book, Drew? Did we get it right?
Yeah, it's very nice. They did a great job.
Yeah, so take a minute and just answer this poll real quickly. And we'll give you just a minute to do that. As they're doing that, any final comments from the panelists?
Well, this has been great fun, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's always good seeing you guys.
Yep, it has been fun. Obviously, the audience today can see why you three were picked. Somebody just asked the question, can I invest more than once? The answer to that is yes. You can invest more than once. So, well, all right. I think we're done. If you've had a chance to answer the poll question, thanks again to everyone. Have a great evening. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.